Frostpunk combines a survival city building experience with interactive narrative prompts and sets these on the backdrop of a social engineering/management mechanic, and all of these are set in a highly interesting alternative history Neo-Victorian setting. The first thing Frostpunk brought to my mind was the mythical and fictional, may I add, city of Atlantis. Maybe it's because I've played Zeus and Poseidon recently, and the Poseidon adventures start with you building up Atlantis, but the circular city planned approach is something very reminiscent of the Atlantis concentric rings to my mind. The immediate second thing the warm steampunky glow of the city lights reminded me was City of Ember. Anyone else remember that movie? It seems to have kinda slipped through the cracks of pop culture because I haven't really found a lot of videos about it on the YouTubes. The concept of the movie wasn't that different and might have worked better for the world of Frostpunk as well, because in City of Ember, humanity built a city underground meant to survive for 200 years following some world-ending event. But looking at City of Ember's art direction and how your Frostpunk settlement looks, I'm fairly sure there might have been some inspiration taken from Ember. Anyway, Frostpunk takes place in an alternate history version of 1886, when the British Empire was the sole superpower. It is fairly grounded in history, but it adds some fanciful steampunky creations such as giant automatons and such. It could arguably be, kinda sorta where steam engine driven technology would have gotten to if the internal combustion engine wouldn't have been invented. In the world of Frostpunk, a series of massive volcanic eruptions and the apparent dimming of the sun have plunged the planet into a really deep volcanic winter. These sorts of events have happened around 10 times in the past 2000 years, but none of them have been anywhere close to the scale portrayed in Frostpunk. But much like with any good piece of fiction, what Frostpunk does, it starts in reality and then it dials it up to 13. So temperatures are constantly plummeting, millions have died due to crop failure, and as a last-ditch effort for survival, special giant heat generators are built in the resource-rich north by the Brits and Americans to act as the centers of settlements where civilizations can survive through this longest of winters. Visually speaking, the art direction did a lot of really cool and detailed things with very few options, in the sense that there are only so many things you can do with completely white snow and some fire and smoke effects. A lot of attention was put into how the snow would behave in relation to how close it is to a heat source. For instance, you'll notice how the amount of snow that piles up on the buildings increases the farther away they are from a heat source, which makes sense, and likewise you'll see the ground defrost when you turn on a steam hub. Really cool atmospheric stuff. Otherwise, you can zoom in quite a lot and look at the designs and animations in detail. This liquid engine that the game was built with looks really interesting, and I'm curious if it can be used for other strategy applications. Otherwise, a nice detail put into the design of the buildings is that they are supposed to look like what you'd expect from a steampunk Neo-Victorian setting, but since they are made up only out of wood and steel, they look ramshackle and shoddy. Very interesting to take a closer look at, but with the game paused, of course. So the generator is at the center of your settlement and it will radiate warmth as long as you can feed it with enough coal. You are left to build your settlement in a circular pattern around it. The farther your buildings are from it, the colder they'll be. There are some different things to consider because most of the industrial buildings have a certain internal level of warmth that will allow them to be placed farther away, but your homes and medical buildings and such will need to be fairly close to a generator or to steam hubs. There are two ways to unlock new buildings: through research and through enacting new laws. You can start building workshops where you can put your engineers to work on researching various advancements. Things like new buildings or improvements to already existing ones, such as upgrading the heating potential of your generator, steam hubs and thermostats, as well as improving the efficiency of various others, whether it's related to them producing more or requiring less heat in order to run. The enacting of laws is a very particular and thematic way of unlocking new buildings. These laws are the ways in which you'll be able to engineer your society, because humans aren't simply drones in need of food and shelter. We're social creatures, and as such, considering this very harsh environment, new and different societal norms will have to be implemented. You will always start with the adaptation book of laws, which deal with general societal issues, things like what should you do with the sick, the dead, the children, that sort of stuff. But after a bit, once the general survival requirements are somewhat covered, your people will need something more. They'll need some type of social framework beyond mere survival to exist in. This is when you will have to make a choice between order and faith, and this choice will decide a lot of things going forward and offer fairly different gameplay experiences. The signing of new laws is intertwined with the interactive narrative events that take place in the game. These prompts will happen from time to time as a result of the situation on the ground. Your people will react to the poor availability of heat, food, and other things, which you'll have to do your best either to fix or delay. But keep in mind that whenever you delay such a request, it will come back and be even more pressing. A bunch of these events will be direct requests for certain laws to be signed. You can still choose to not do it, but depending on what's going on in the particular game or scenario, the disadvantages might be too damaging to ignore. Surviving within your settlement area will be difficult and challenging, but you will always have everything you need around you, as well as the potential of generating practically infinite resources after certain buildings are researched. But don't think that's gonna make your life easier, because you'll still be limited by the number of people you have and their working hours. Both of those variables can be affected by laws, by the way. You can enact 24-hour shifts as well as prolonged 14-hour shifts, and you can also send children to work. There is an alternative to both those things, automatons, but they require a lot of research as well as resources to be built. So you shouldn't really go for automatons from the get-go, even though I think some people have tried it and probably succeeded at it. But I didn't have time for that sort of experimentation. These are just a couple of the moral and ethical questions that you'll have to grapple with during every game of Frostpunk, and these decisions only get murkier and more nuanced once you choose the order or faith path. The game would be incomplete if it would limit you to your settlement only. The setting is so interesting and harsh and is set up in such a way that leaves a lot more questions about what's going on in the world around you in general. Once you research and build a beacon, you will be able to explore your surroundings and maybe find extra resources, survivors, and knowledge about what happened to other generator cities. Exploration results into further interactive narrative prompts and in one of the best sources of free resources, until you reach the point where you can set up outposts, but that's farther on towards the latter part of the mid-game. Frostpunk offers several types of campaigns as well as endless modes. Unfortunately, some of the campaigns are only available as DLCs. Rifts, Last Autumn, and On the Edge are the DLCs I'm talking about. On the other hand, it is also possible in the future to get the entire thing on something like Humble Bundle, maybe, because On the Edge was the final DLC, so the game is now content complete. I got my base game and the Rifts DLC from Humble Bundle, so I can only imagine that at a certain point in the future the entire thing will be available there. There are 3 endless modes, perfectly themed to appease most of the gamers out there wishing for a story-free experience. These are Endurance, The Builders, and Serenity. The Builders is the only one that is part of a DLC, unfortunately, but Endurance is there for those who want a super survivalist challenge, while Serenity is there for those like myself who want a chillaxy city building experience while still maintaining some of the survival challenges. By the way, you can customize several of the variables within any of the campaigns or endless modes. If that wasn't enough, the game has a survival option toggle for each campaign, which will make things extra difficult by taking out active pause and only allowing you to save on game exit. Active pause, yes, I forgot to mention that. There are so many things to mention about Frostpunk. In non-survival mode playthroughs, you have active pause, which is something I use all the time, especially when you have to decide what your scouts have to do next. I should also add that you have 3 speed settings, normal speed, fast, and very fast, corresponding to the 1, 2, and 3 buttons, making it very quick to shift speeds. One interesting thing the developers implemented is a type of failsafe when it comes to the very fast game speed. The game will only stay in the very fast setting for a limited amount of time as a way of protecting you from interactive prompts timing out and in general to allow you to better deal with time sensitive issues. The music is perfectly fitting, classical music and generally very sad sounding. It reminded me a lot of the Arcanum of Steamworks and Magic Obscura soundtrack, and that's always a good thing. I think Frostpunk can work as a highly visual and illustrative way of showing how things can go awry when planning and building a society, because you have to balance short-term rewards with long-term survival. As an example, during my first story mode attempt, I basically stumbled into making a fairly Roman Empire-esque society. But instead of bread and circus, I gave them booze and circus. Even though that choice was very much not in tune with my personal ideology and totally not what I would have normally done. It is what the situation called for, considering the circumstances and what the game offered as options. The setting is framing things into an extremely extreme survival scenario, and it's not about individual survival, but the survival of the human species. Sacrifices and various moral or ethical compromises have to be made. What Frostpunk does very well, besides theme and survival challenge, is tempo. I have never reached a point in any playthrough where I was comfortable. There are short times of lulls in between various crises which have to be carefully managed though. One of the things that I learned quite fast that I must do is to keep an eye on the temperature overlay, and whenever the temperature goes up a bit, play around with the generator and Steam Hub settings in order to save and hopefully stockpile more coal. You will generally go through several periods of time in which you either have too much coal and have to build extra depots for it, or you're running dangerously low and the generator shuts down several times. Thankfully, your people are pretty hardy and they will take a lot of abuse before they banish your ass. This also helps with your settlement surviving through cold snaps that you are improperly prepared for, and most likely there will be several of those. All of these positive things being said, there are some tiny quirks or choices that were made during development that I feel could have been done differently and allow for an even more realistic take on the survival theme. One important thing would have been to allow you to turn on the Steam Hubs only during the evening and night. You know, when most of the people will be at home and they need warmth because for the rest of the day they're at work. And when it comes to work, the extended and 24-hour shifts make sense, sure, but what would have made even more sense would have been to allow for 2 or more shifts. I mean, we've had shift work for a long ass time. It's not like it's a contemporary invention. I guess both these suggestions would have made the game much less challenging, true, but they were just that bit of immersion breaking for me since I could only think about how much sense those would have made. Frostpunk, in its base game form at least, is almost the type of survival city building experience that I've been looking for, ever since Banished ignited my passion for the genre several years ago. It's not really missing anything per se in terms of the experience it sets out to offer, but it also isn't exactly the type of experience that I'm looking for. Don't get me wrong, I think I've made it clear that it is a really solid game which I like a lot, but I don't feel it in my geek gut that this is the one that I'll play for the foreseeable future. It's definitely worthy of my nonsense seal of approval though. But now it's time for you to tell me in the comments what you think of Frostpunk and suggest other survival city builders I might want to check out in the future. And I also want to direct your attention to my city builder playlist, which you should be seeing on the screen and in the description. It would also be great if you'd consider subscribing to my channel and then clicking the bell notification. That last part is super important for small channels such as my own. I also have a Patreon page. If you are so inclined, please go check that out. I've been Steven Nonsense. Thank you very much for watching. Have a great rest of the day and see you next time.